Okay. Oh geez, hi guys out there. We are live, and I'm sorry it's taken us so long. We had some technical difficulties, so thank you, online audience, for being very patient with us, and in-person audience, where we had this very awkward pause up here. So, good morning. I'm going to start with Jeff, and he's going to talk a little bit about his project and what he did, and kind of just in a very short nutshell. And then we're going to go back and actually dig into each of these projects and kind of the way that they looked at them and approached them. But could you start and just give us a quick overview of what you did and to talk about that?
Sure. Thanks, Kimmy. Hey, everybody. I'm going to hold this close to my mouth here. Can everybody hear me all right? Okay. I'm going to project a little bit. So the two things that I wanted to talk to you about today, I am part of a nonprofit called Sketch City. We organize the hackathons and hack nights and civic tech community here in Houston. And the two projects that are really near and dear to our hearts, one is kind of a program around open data and making sure that the government releases data that it collects that's non-confidential and non-critical. And we have all these campaigns around how to find that data because we don't know what exists. And sometimes that data is considered controversial. So for example, I wanted to get data around where all the fiber optic cables exist in Houston, and they said, no, that's sensitive. So our Attorney General denied that. So there's a lot that goes into being able to make a case that data benefits the community. The other project that I'll tell you a little bit more about later is called AirBot. We have a state agency that is in charge of enforcing environmental standards, and it does everything up to the line of actually enforcing those standards. So we have really serious air quality problems here in Houston. Oh, that's good. We have serious air quality problems here in Houston, and so we're building a system that scrapes existing data and readings and actually makes sense of it and tells you whether or not the air is safe to breathe here.
Good morning. I'm Amy Woodall, and I run an agency called Black Sheep. I know a lot of you in the room, but for those of you who I don't know, for those of you who are watching remotely, my agency, we're a brand strategy firm, which essentially boils down to marketing and communications, but we are exclusively cause-driven. So what does that mean? We work with nonprofits, we work with government organizations, and we work with for-profit companies who put social responsibility really into the DNA of their company. And when I introduce my company as working with those three clients, everyone understands and assumes the nonprofit side. Everyone kind of ignores the government part, and then they don't really understand the for-profit, socially responsible part. And today what I'm going to focus on is obviously the government part, which I'm really excited to have a captive audience who wants to know about that part of our work because it's really important. So what we have been working on last year, I had the pleasure of getting to work with the president on a digital strategy project in February, which led to me getting to know a lot of people at the White House, and later subsequently led to a call from the First Lady's office to invite my agency to partner with her on a project focused on increasing the number of college graduates in America. And it was a really intimidating call, but a call that you don't really say no to. So one of the things you're going to hear me talk a lot about today is collaboration. That's really one of the core values of our company, and a lot of people use that as a buzzword, but we really mean it because our mission is to activate people around things that matter, and sometimes those things are really big, and so we have to rally other people and figure out how to get the job done, and that's what we had to do with what is now called the Better Make Room campaign. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Better Make Room campaign throughout the morning, but just so everybody knows, our mission was to build a campaign that really gave students, it spoke directly to students, but then it also gave them an opportunity to move the conversation forward themselves. We've had incredible results with this campaign, which isn't hard to do when you have the First Lady as your megaphone. But we've had 560 million impressions online, more than 3 million posts on Facebook, and over 1,000 press hits since last October. Best results I've ever had for a client. But the most important thing to us is that we started a conversation Those numbers are not just numbers to us. Those numbers mean that we are really changing what the conversation looks like about students continuing their education after high school.
Hi, I'm Chris Valdez. I run an agency here in town called Primer Gray. And today I'm here to talk about a project that's me and some of my colleagues put together as a self-initiated project in support of the Houston Equal Rights Ordinance. Who in the room knows what the Houston Equal Rights Ordinance is or was from its place on the ballot in November? Cool. So about, I mean, maybe a little more than half of you guys, but for those of you that don't know, sorry, there we go. For those of you that don't know, the Houston Equal Rights Ordinance was an anti-discrimination ordinance that was put on the city ballot in November. It protected 15 different categories of folks here in town across 15 different classes. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that today. The reason that we decided to create a campaign all our own was that we saw that there were a lot of stories that weren't being told, and that the human face behind those stories and the protections of those people was not out there in a way that we thought was as effective as it could be. And that led us to create this campaign. I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along, but that's the gist of it.
So 3 kind of really interesting, different types of programs that we can talk about today. And whether you agree with these programs today or not, in the end of the day, we have a lot to learn from how to harness public sentiment and work on changing perceptions. And social media is a really big part of that, because social media will give us that chance to reach out to people that we wouldn't be able to get to reach out to otherwise. So one of the things we talked about on the call, which I think was really important, is, and I think for the people in the room might ask you, well, how can I do that? I mean, my company is just like a widget company, or I run a hospital, or I have a hospital social media account, or, you know, there's people here that are individuals, which might have a little bit better. And every time you open your mouth about something on social media, it seems like people pile on and say horrible things. And I don't know, I've heard people are unfriending people, and things are crazy because you're looking at your feed going, I don't agree with their politics. So can you kind of tell me, like, how can an individual or company start to look for cause-related things that they might want to support? Like, what would be the first step? I don't want to go to much steps, but just what do you have to do?
Well, that's why we started Sketch City, was to give people an intelligent avenue for getting smart about an issue and figuring out how they can use their skills, what they're sophisticated at, to actually make a difference, even if they can only give an hour or 2 hours in any given time. So we've curated a lot of projects that allow individuals to jump right into a community of a couple thousand people and just start working. For us, it doesn't really matter what you care about, because we fight for government transparency and data-driven decision-making. So if you can make a case using data, like, we want to help. So.
I think there are a couple of things. I was thinking a lot about who would be in the room this morning, and I know a lot of you are not in situations where you can control what your company is rallying behind. So I wanted to make sure that we talked about this from the perspective of what you can do as an individual, regardless of where you are or where you go from here. I think the most important thing, and this may seem obvious to everyone, but I don't think it's always done. It's like when a client comes to me and they think they have a marketing strategy because they instinctively know what to do. That's not a marketing strategy. You need it in writing. And the same goes for starting to make a difference around a cause. You really need to know what you are passionate about and what you want to stand up for. That goes for whether you're within a company and you're wanting to rally a culture around a cause, or whether you're an individual. This is a really random tangent, but I watched an episode of My So-Called Life, and it's also dating me. I watched an episode of My So-Called Life in my early college years where the main character ends up, I believe, almost getting arrested or getting arrested for standing up against or fighting for abortion. And the monologue in her head, if you've seen the show, because she kind of has this journaling monologue, was about really knowing what you're willing to stand up for, to the point where you would be willing to go to jail, or you would be willing to die for a cause. And it affected me so deeply, because at that moment, I didn't really know. I cared about a lot of things and I was really passionate, but I didn't really know what that one thing was. And from then on, I began this quest to kind of figure out what that one thing was. And what I later realized is that it's not one thing for me, it's a lot of things. And really my biggest passion is activating people around the things that they care about. And because of that, I get to do a lot of different things. But I think knowing what you care about is the very first step, and knowing that without a doubt, whether that's one thing or multiple things, because then you are really empowered to move forward on it. It's almost like an accountability thing. And incorporating that into your company culture can be really powerful. And you're not limited to activating that if you're the boss. It's a conversation that you can start no matter who you are within a company. So I would encourage you to be fearless about A, really identifying that, and then B, starting to talk to people about it.
Yeah, I think that last point in particular, I would definitely echo. For us, it was starting the campaign in support of Hero was a giant experiment, to be honest. It just so happens that I run the company, and so I can make decisions like this. But it also was a very organic process, and we went into it not really knowing what the outcomes would be for the ordinance, but also for ourselves. And it really came down to a moment at which we realized that I saw the news that the Texas Supreme Court was going to make the city of Houston put the ordinance on the ballot for popular vote. And I went to Kara, who's here in the audience, and I said, like, God, we should post about this. We should say something, just like on the Instagram. And then I realized, I'm like, what the hell? Like, really, just an Instagram post? Like, we've got to do more than that. And it really evolved into a larger discussion of exploring, like, what we were capable of doing, knowing that we had the tools in our toolbox to influence the way that people thought about this ordinance, to communicate in a different way than people have been communicating to date. It really grew. So like Amy said, it just takes someone willing to listen, and I think leading with conviction. When people see conviction, they're attracted to that conviction and to that understanding that you really believe in something, and I think people listen to that. And so, like Amy said, being fearless when it comes to introducing ideas, because they can grow into something much larger than you expect.
The other thing is, if you're an individual, I don't want you to be thinking that you can't do something, because you have to remember that there are people like us out here. So if you were an individual and you had identified that Hero is something that you were really passionate about, you can find your people too. So making that clear in your head about what you really want to put your weight behind and your energy behind, and then putting that out there can also help you find your people, your tribe that really cares about that. And then you're not by yourself trying to figure out how to do something anymore. So keep that in mind too.
If I can just add something to that, that kind of unlocked something in my mind when Amy said, find your people, because one of the reasons why I do what I do is because I hate working with assholes. If you know me, then you know that. Like, I really, really hate it. And as I get older, like, I have less and less of a tolerance for it. And if you like working with lots of different types of people, it becomes a challenge, because assholes are landmines, they're everywhere. And so you really have to make sure that when you're bonded, like I'm here with a bunch of people from the League of Women Voters. Yes. And I've really loved working with the League of Women Voters, because we all come from different backgrounds. We all have different political affiliations, and yet we rally around two main things. One is that people should vote, and two is that people should know what they're voting for. And that is something that when you splice out all the little politics, I'm sure there are people in this room who are voting for people that I could never vote for. But if we agree on that one thing, like, we can do stuff together, and all the other stuff go anyway. So find your people. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Actually, I love that you say that, Jeff, because really what it's about is finding those places where we can align, right, with people, and finding what you really care about. So for me and my company, Zoetica, it's all about community, which is why I start Social Media Breakfast, which is why I put hours and hours into this every month for really no pay. So I do that because community is so integral to what we do. We're about community, we're about building it, and all of that. So I know that. And so whenever people ask me to do something, if it has to do with building community, I tend to be pretty open about that. So it makes us not be territorial. Like, if Rebecca comes to me and wants me to help her with Social Media Day, to me, that's all about community. You know what I'm saying? So I don't see the problem. I don't need to compete with like somebody else in town or somebody else across town or around the world. So one of the things I wanted to talk to you about that is, how can we bring that into the online environment and start to teach people how to do these alignments? How have you gotten around some of the controversy, I guess, that comes up when these things happen? Because there's always going to be haters. I mean, or in your case, I'm not going to say that, but those guys.
It's true. I'll go first. I mean, this is a sensitive topic because nobody likes to talk shit, but I think that, you know, for us, and for me personally, I tend to separate out the people that I work with and the people that I don't. And I usually have an open mind when it comes to working with new people. But oftentimes the haters are people who, if I can paint with a broad stroke, people who have not found their place in the world yet. You come up with an idea. You want to get people to vote. And then you find out that the League of Women Voters exists. And you say, no, I can do it better than them. I can register more people than the League. I'm going to set up a competing org instead of just going and volunteering and meeting these people. This happens all the time in Houston. People drill for oil in the ground. Yeah. I mean, but specifically in Houston, we have a culture of drilling in the ground and seeing what comes up. And that's not a collaborative endeavor. So I think that the people all sitting up here are people who have been around for a number of years. I've been in Houston 7 years doing this. And over time, I've gone through all of those emotions, and now I'm at this point where I'm pretty comfortable with what we're doing. And, you know, if you want to work in technology and do data and civic tech stuff, like, we want to have you. And even if your politics are totally different, my friend Randy back there is a huge advocate for open data, and we disagree on lots of things, but we collaborate constantly. And through those conversations, we get better. So, yeah. I guess that's, and you're not a hater at all. You're a lover.
But that's the point, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, we could have constant conflict, but we don't. Oh, we could have constant conflict, but instead we collaborate.
I think nothing worth doing is ever easy. So if you have something that you want to stand up for, you can expect that there will be friction and that there will be obstacles and challenges in your way. It helps if you find your people, because then you can fight those things together. You know, when we chatted on the phone earlier this week about the things that we really wanted to talk to this audience about, the thing that was important for me is that I think there's an old way of doing business. Well, there are lots of old ways of doing business. But one of the key things that I truly believe is that there was a time in business where we all tried to stay neutral because we didn't want to piss anybody off and lose the opportunity to work with them. And, you know, we didn't talk about politics, or we didn't talk about human rights, because what if somebody had a differing opinion and then they wouldn't be your client, or they would unfollow your business, or that was pre-Facebook. But I don't think that's where we live anymore. I think we live in a time where, you know, Chris used the word conviction, and the people in my office probably want to start a conviction jar where I put $1 in it every time I say it, because they'd all be rich. That's my favorite word. There's something so magic about what it stands for. And businesses today, with the generations that are coming up, and even what the generations are teaching the generations before them, your business needs to have conviction, and you need to stand up for what you believe in. And guess what? When you do, the people that are not going to work with you are probably not the people that you wanted to work with anyway. So don't be afraid to stand up for what you believe in. That's probably going to help you find more of the right kind of people to surround you with, more of the business that you want, and you're going to feel more fulfilled about who you are and the business you're building or the life you're building, regardless of what your circumstances are.
Yeah, I think, gosh, that's a tough question. I think particularly with the issue that we dealt with, I think it was one of the struggles of the campaign in general. So there was a kind of, I guess, a sort of sanctioned campaign, and then there was a campaign that we did. And, one of the goals that we had with our campaign was really bringing to light all of the different categories that were protected under the Equal Rights Ordinance. And when we talk about intersectionality, when we talk about why the issues that matter to the Black community are also important for the queer community and vice versa, when we talk about civil rights, when we put human faces to the conversation that we were trying to have, I think that's the thing that allowed people to buy in more universally. When you put the story of a foster mother who's dealing with an HIV affected family, and why she faces discrimination and why this ordinance protects her, you have people from different communities who are able to identify with that when you start to talk about all of the different classes. And those aren't mutually exclusive, and so that was one of the greatest challenges, and I think that's one of the reasons that the ordinance didn't do so well. The opposition strategically waited until the very last minute to serve the ruling, so that there was very little time to organize around this idea. So yeah, I think I answered your question.
Yeah, sort of, but there's a politics part of it, right? And then there's also the part of moving constituencies together. I actually printed a couple, and you guys can come look at these later, and I can share the links, but I actually did share the links. They're coming out right now on Twitter somewhere on my thing, so you can look at these on my Twitter account, KamiChat, KamiChat. And I also SMBHOU'd them, so there you go. So there's two things that I found in the last couple of weeks that I thought were really interesting. One was in Utah, and there was a compromise between the Mormon Church and the LGBT community in Utah. So how did that happen? You know what I'm saying? How did that happen? And I thought that this interview was really telling. They talked to some, very conservative people who said, I feel like, it's a human rights thing, and I feel like I don't have to give any of my religion away in order to give other people rights. And I thought that was a really interesting point of view that's very difficult. The other one that I thought was interesting, and I didn't even mention it on the call, but it's Marriott CEO. He's done a lot of speaking up about these kinds of issues, especially around the hero kind of stuff. And he was interviewed, like here it is, Marriott, and he was interviewed about speaking up on social issues. And he said, it's a business decision. And I thought that was interesting because he said, I am going to support whatever my employees support. And he said, regardless of what I think personally, this is a business decision for me. So I thought that was two interesting ways of looking at these kinds of issues that are very interesting. And I wanted to kind of dig into AirBot for a minute around that, because you guys did have for a while a Twitter account, right? But it's no longer, or what's going on with could you kind of just talk about AirBot and its controversy?
Sure. So AirBot's in the process of being developed. Neethi back there is working on it. So AirBot, what happens is the Texas Commission for Environmental Quality publishes, they have air quality monitoring stations called gas chromatographs. They have 45 of them in Harris County. And every 15 minutes it reads what's in the air, what chemicals are in the air, and it publishes it. And you can find it yourself by going on the TCEQ website /something.aspx and then fill out a form, like a 17 or 18 field form, and then you'll retrieve a table of all of these chemical compounds and a number. And numbers next to them, and they mean nothing. Air science is so complicated. There's so much that goes. You need air quality scientists. So what we've done is we started scraping that, because if we don't know what it is, we might as well capture it. So we started scraping it and saving it to a database. We're working with the the Air Alliance Houston, who we're actually meeting with this afternoon, and talking about what's the language that we can use when we talk about air quality violations, because all violations are self-reported. So if you burn up a bunch of tires, you have to report it, and then TCEQ won't do anything about it. And there are loopholes in the law too that allow you certain times of day, you can release whatever you want into the air. For us, cancer is bipartisan, right? It doesn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat. Like, the air that you breathe matters to all of us. And Cami, the thing that you pointed out, what jumps out to me about those articles is that the labels that we use in the parties that represent us are wrong. Something is discombobulated, and that's why our politics seems so weird, right? Being a progressive doesn't necessarily mean that you're a liberal anymore, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're a Democrat anymore. If you want to fight for the right to vote, that's not a Republican or a Democrat issue. If you want to fight for clean air and no cancer, like, that's not a Republican or Democrat issue. What we have are people who are using government for their own ends, and it's injuring the people. So from my standpoint, when Marriott takes a stand like that, when Marriott CEO takes a stand like that, I'm conflicted, because on one hand, sure, it should be the will of your employees, but what if all your employees are ignorant? What if you seriously, like you should set a tone as a leader and say human rights are important to Marriott as a brand. We don't want to buy from a supply chain that is, child labor, or we don't, put your money where your mouth is. And this is a huge business opportunity, not to be crass, but when things are in chaos, that's when entrepreneurs flourish. So like, when you start to figure out the patterns of how the world is going to align over the next couple of years, you can make a lot of money. And I feel like they're touching on it, but nobody's quite cracked that code yet.
Love that. Yeah, no, she's like, oh, please don't send that to me. But it is true that some things are more controversial than others. You would think that college education wouldn't be controversial at all, but has it been? Could you talk a little bit about any kinds of challenges you've been, dealing with in the Better Make Room campaign?
The Better Make Room campaign is far less controversial, even though it was initiated and has been one of the First Lady's top priorities, which could mean that it falls to the Democratic side. The idea of continuing your education after high school, whether that's a 2-year degree, a 4-year degree, community college, technical school, we incorporate all of those options into the path that we're trying to put these students on and the conversation that we're having, and that's really hard to argue with. I think our biggest controversy, if you will, is trying to keep the client and the free range conversation in the voice that's speaking to the youth of America. This campaign was built as a campaign of the Reach Higher brand, which is the First Lady's initiative to do the same exact thing, which was started about 2 years ago. And the Reach Higher brand was effective, but it was most effective with the adult population, the supporters of these students, so educators, faculty, parents, counselors, the people that surround the student and help them more likely get onto the right path. But the big disconnect was that the voice of Reach Higher was resonating with them, and everyone in this room knows you can't speak to an adult and a child at the same time, or a youth of America at the same time, and have both parties get your message, and welcome your message and embrace your message and then act on your message. So the biggest challenge for us for Better Make Room is really continuing to speak to youth and then continuing to build pathways for youth to speak to each other, because even though we've spent the past year immersed in research for Generation Z, we're still not kids. We're not Generation Z. So even though we can put ourselves into that character like an actor does in a play, we are not that audience. So it gets more authentic if we hand the mic to the generation itself and let the generation coach and support and cheer on their peers. So that's been our biggest challenge. Of course, there are people that chime in with negative comments and feedback. I don't know if any of you follow the White House feeds, but those poor people must have learned very early on not to read the comments or to really desensitize themselves to the comments because they're brutal. I want to jump in and defend people whenever I'm reading them. So so that's been our biggest I guess challenge, if there is one. And then also just changing, creating a shift. It's a really long-term trajectory for this goal, and we have to find metrics that show us that we're on the right path beyond just the number increasing, because it's going to take years for the number to increase. But we feel successful if the youth are talking and the numbers are showing us that.
So yeah, that's really great, and those challenges are many, and I'm sure, I'm going to turn to Chris here in a second, and of course he's got a totally different story, I'm sure, from yours, Amy. But what I thought was really interesting about the Better Make Room program is that you guys are also really activating youth to talk, and I like that. And number two, that you're sending them reminders of things to do. Like, it's almost like what they do in youth today, because I have some youth, which I'm not going to talk about, but they are, telling them in school, you take care of yourself, you do this, you do that. And so for you to send them reminders, could you talk a little bit about these reminders that you send them, like to do the next thing, or just talk about them a bit.
Yeah, so the other part of the campaign is that we try and meet youth where they are. One interesting fact, if you look at the Twitter account for Better Make Room, you'll notice that the numbers are really unimpressive. And that's because Generation Z does not follow. They don't join. They keep independence in the social media space so that they can look when they want to and they aren't captive. So the numbers are really low. And so what we were trying to do with meeting them where they are is be in those social media spaces, desensitize ourselves a little bit to what those numbers look like, knowing that we can see that they're seeing the content and interacting with the content, even if they're not clicking that follow button. But the big piece that was missing is, okay, this sounds great. Let's all talk about our future. Let's commit to our future. The tagline for the campaign is saying things out loud makes them happen. So on the website right at the top, there's an opportunity for them to say something out loud about their future and to make that commitment. Once they make that commitment, they're entered into a system that allows us to text message them with important key deadlines and reminders. So remembering back to my high school days, I remember just really feeling overwhelmed about all of the decisions that you're having to make and how much your life is changing and how intimidating what you're supposed to do next can be. So there's an app called Up Next that works in tandem with the Better Make Room campaign that sends them messages that helps, just kind of like a digital hand-holding system or a digital coach that reminds them, okay, you need to apply for your FAFSA deadline. What is FAFSA? So it breaks these things down for them. Here's how you can get money right now. And it all speaks to them in that language. So, hey kid, here's how you can get some money right now, instead of, this formal scholarship federal language. It also helps them with things like SAT prep and ACT prep and other ideas like college visits and timing, because the biggest thing for them during that period of time is managing all of those deadlines. And aside from homework, you really haven't been taught about deadlines at that point in your life. It's a really new thing. So that's something that we just wanted to make easy for them. We wanted it to come to them. We didn't want it to feel invasive. We wanted it to speak their language. We wanted it to be just a friendly voice that makes things a little bit less overwhelming during that time.
Yeah, and I guess why that spoke to me so much is because when I was young and getting ready to go to college, I was the first one to go to college, and nobody in my family actually knew what to tell me to do. And I missed all these deadlines because I had no clue. I had no clue. And I think that kind of, I mean, then I bootstrapped it and I made it through college, but, you know, on my own. But the point is I could have had more scholarships, I could have had more money. And so for disadvantaged kids, I think this becomes a really big deal. You know, people that don't have parents that are telling them exactly when to, you know, go for their college visits or whatever. So I think that's just spectacular. And I'm just putting that in from a personal perspective. So kind of turning back to you, Chris, what were your challenges with the Hero and kind of taking this stand as a company? Has there been any blowback on your company? Has there been any amazing things that have happened to your company because of this? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Challenges. Well, if you know the ordinance and you know the discourse that surrounded the ordinance, you know the challenges that the campaign in general, the idea in general faced. You know, we see it in North Carolina, we see it in other states. The bathroom bill. It's a challenge. It's challenging all around. For us as on this particular campaign here in Houston, one of the key strategies going in was knowing that we were not going to change the minds of people that were firmly planted in opposition to the ordinance. And so as a result, we didn't target people who were opponents of the ordinance. We targeted people who on election day were going to sit on their couch and let other people decide what the city was going to look like for the next 2 years or for the future. And so it really became a get out the vote campaign. It was a, hey, this is what's at stake campaign. Move your butts, get to the polls, and vote in favor of the Equal Rights Ordinance. And so as a result, a lot of our targeting, which was mainly on Facebook, you know, was targeting affinity groups. And so we didn't face a lot of opposition, but when we did face opposition, it was usually really crass. And we found that there was so much love and support in the people who were for the ordinance that we weren't put in a position where we had to defend our position because other people spoke up for it. And so we see, you know, hateful comments on a post, and we see people from the community going in and either fighting, correcting, shutting down, whatever the case may be. And so we seldom had to address those things. I mean, as social media professionals, I'm sure there are plenty in this room. You know, I think everyone knows, you know, don't engage the trolls. So that don't be the trolls. And so that was kind of our position there. In terms of, you know, as a result of the campaign or the company, I mean, I think, you know, there were a lot of internal benefits, honestly. Like we learned from this, you know, that we were able to take a stand as a company. We're 8 people. We had to do a lot of internal education around this particular issue and know it front and back and understand, you know, why this was important to the trans community, why this was about gender equality, why this was about religious freedom. And that was, I think, a really important point for us as a company, because we basically laid it all out on the table and said, you know, here are things that we believe in. Externally speaking, you know, I mean, no blowback that that's visible. You know, I mean, maybe somebody's sitting in their corner on their computer going, "Oh, those guys are lame," or who knows. We didn't lose a client, and honestly, it's been one of those things now that you know, it lives on our website. You know, it's like, hey, here's our position on things, and we've had clients who come in and, you know, and we're like, why are you approaching us? You know, this doesn't seem like we're, you know, kind of aligned with what you're doing. In particular, I mean, there was a religious institution that came in and was clearly in opposition to the ordinance. And, you know, I just kind of pointed this out, and I just wanted to like show you that, you know, we kind of stated our opinion on things, and you know, that they came back with, we don't care that we disagree on this particular subject, but we care about and are attracted to the passion and the energy and the humanity that you put into this conversation and the way that you built this campaign. And we want that for us without what we're trying to do. And so that was really interesting to hear and unexpected. Yeah.
That's a great story because I think that's the fear, right? That we'll stand up for what we think and then kind of it's going to kick us in the teeth, right? So yeah, you know, I can promise you I've put nothing on my Facebook feed about like the election. I don't want to hear anybody's opinion about it either way. And the opposite. Yeah, you're the opposite. So, I mean, I also have to say that there's different approaches to this because I also am a very cause-driven person. So I'm very much going to defend the rights of people on my Facebook feed. So what you will find on my Facebook feed is a lot of stuff about online civility, and that's probably why I wanted to have this conversation today, because that civility thing and Civilination and my role on the board of directors of Civilination is probably really driving that in large part. But the idea that we can have conversations and disagree, but we don't have to be toxic about it, right? Can we actually have a conversation where we don't blame, throw aspersions, and what my friend called, Ike Piggott, my friend called greedy sheep. You tell people they're greedy, you get all these things like, well, the reason you believe that is because you're a greedy, SOB, and you're this and you're that. And so, I think that those kind of ad hominem attacks, if you will, are things that really shut down conversation around really important issues, whether you're on one side or the other side of these issues. And I love the idea of the core values that we talked about, Amy, in the middle, and also in our call. And I asked them to come up with 5 or 6 things that you guys could walk away with, and they didn't want to come up with tips, but I wrote them down anyway because that's just me, sorry. So once again, I'm like, I run the place, so I'm gonna have to give them a few things. But one of the ones that you guys talked about was taking a stand for your brand, and I really like that. The second one was figuring out what you care about as a company at the core and making it part of the conversation in your workplace. I thought that was really interesting, and I know that for Primer Gray, that's a big deal. And I actually went to your page about Hero, and it's really all of their faces. It's pictures of his staff and people around their staff. I don't know if it's all just staff, but you can talk about it. It's people that are just different, like in different ways, different races, different ethnicities, different, deformities, whatever it is, that they've embraced their differentness, and it's a really cool page. One of you that's in Primer Gray, hey, where's Bryn? Might want to, your face is right on it, so could you tweet that for me? So everybody else can see it too. And then know what to avoid and how to respond was another one along with that, which we talked about, and know your facts. And I want to kind of land on know your facts and ask some question about what do you mean by know your facts? Why do you have to know your facts?
So you can shut that shit down. Seriously.
Keeping it real. Yeah. Keeping it real.
I mean, the fact of the matter is that we all open our mouths without really knowing what we're talking about, and that drives me absolutely insane. It's always driving me insane, and I hate it, and I don't tolerate it. And when I do it, I appreciate when people call me out on it. And if you approach it with an open mind, and that the world is a dynamic place, and there's lots of layers to things, and it's endlessly complicated, the more you're on a journey to figure that out, the better your discourse becomes, and the more people who come out of left field and say something crazy, like we should build walls, which I think is crazy, is you shut that down. You'd be like, no, the data shows building walls does not. The issue you're trying to solve is not about building walls. So I think that being educated about your issue helps you shut down ignorant people, but it also helps you defend yourself against very wise, very smart people on the other side. If you're in a defensive situation, and if you're in a learning situation, it helps you learn from them too. And that's another thing that I like about the League of Women Voters. The last time I'm going to plug it, but y'all should join. It's $70 a year, and you get a vote on the issues that it chooses to investigate. But basically, that's what it does. Is it tries to elevate the discourse and get people smarter about what they're talking about. Because I can't tell you how many hours I've wasted. I think of like the college conversation. You're sitting around, you're playing cards, and you're talking politics, and you're just getting nowhere because nobody knows anything. So it doesn't take that much to just start reading and learning and seeking out people who can teach you stuff and who you can teach stuff to.
Yeah, before you go on. I was very disappointed when I moved to Texas and I realized you had to vote for every judge. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is going to take me hours to figure this out. So thank you, League of Women Voters, because you can actually go there and do that. And I've done that before many, many, many times.
I just wanted to say, obviously, Jeff said everything that needs to be said about educating yourself. That's critically important. But another thing is that I would like to call on everyone in this room to be an educator of other people. Everyone in this room, I know most of you, and everyone watching at home, you are people who care about what's going on, and you are influential in a way that is necessary for all of us. And so I would like to ask you to not only educate yourself, but to consider it an absolute responsibility to educate other people so that you can activate them around the things that you're learning about. And not to turn this into a League of Women Voters rally, but the other thing that I would beg of you is to really share your passion about these issues and about the importance of voting with other people. You would be surprised how often I talk to someone who is a busy mom or a busy traveler for their job, and they decide to let voting go, or they just don't know where to vote. So there are a lot of really small obstacles that I think we can help people overcome. It's really hard to change voter turnout, and we've all been banging our heads against the wall trying to do it for a few years. And the more of you that are out there helping us to do that, the more powerful we can be in really making a difference. To give you one example that actually connects with Chris's work and the HERO Ordinance, I was so distraught about what I was thinking was going to happen with that vote. The night before, I texted every single person in my phone book that lived in Houston that could vote. And I've never done that before. And I got lots of responses. Some affirming that they had already voted and that they would be there and I could count on them. Some that were, I don't know if I can make it to the polls. Some that were, I don't know what this is. Can you tell me more about it? Some that were, oh, I thought that would surely pass, so I was not going to vote. I know for a fact that because I texted those people, at least 10 to 15 people went and voted. And they didn't tell me which way they voted. I certainly hope that they voted the way that I wanted them to, but either way, it didn't really matter to me. What was important is that people understood what was up on the ballot. And so that can really make a difference. And I just beg of you that you don't discount the power that you have in getting other people to activate around things.
Yeah, just to touch on the education point just a bit, you know, for us, the educating ourselves around all of the intricacies of the issue when it came to the Equal Rights Ordinance was super important. While we didn't actively target people that didn't, that weren't for the ordinance, or sorry, against the ordinance, you know, we did find ourselves in conversations where there were people who were on the fence or who just didn't understand it. And it wasn't necessarily that they had strong feelings one way or another. It was that just they wanted clarity. And in order for us to provide that clarity, we had to be really educated on the subject and to help people understand why it was important for them, why it was important for them and their community, even though they didn't feel as though they didn't feel threats of discrimination, that this was an issue that affected the community at large and why that was important to someone who didn't feel threats of discrimination. However, if you don't feel threats of discrimination, you know, I think there are, well, I won't go into that subject, but just to speak a little bit more, so We Are Hero was the name of the campaign. The website is wearehero.us. Just to give an example of some of the folks that were represented, where we had 2 Army veterans. The ordinance protected veterans' rights. So we had an Army veteran and a Marine veteran. So you can go and see those fine ladies on the website. They're incredible human beings. We posted Debbie, who is a recently disabled person. I think she's in her late 60s and facing disability for the first time in her life, and understood the importance of the ordinance for herself. Monique, who's a foster mother. Your family structure was also protected underneath the ordinance. She's also an advocate in the Black Lives Matter movement, and fights against HIV stigma. And then we had Zainab, who's a Jordanian immigrant, and what she called a radical feminist. And she understood the importance for her family, of this ordinance for her family, as well as for her as a woman in the workplace. So that was just an example of some of the people that we highlighted in the campaign.
Right, and I think that was really interesting that you brought all that together, and if it had been, had more time, and it might have gotten a little bit further, but the fact that you put your stake in the ground makes you sleep at night. Yeah. So, and people in here may not agree with that ordinance, and that's fine. But I can't tell you how many times I've driven employees to the polls, people that I know that were going to vote differently than me anyway. So I do think it's important that we have that conversation and continue to in a civil manner. I want to open it up for some questions. I mean, are any of you, or even comments, any of you kind of interested in starting with something? Yeah. Hey, Ken. So he said the ordinance failed, Kindred, and what did you learn from that, Chris?
Yeah. So great question. It's something that we speak openly about because I think it's important that we understand this very publicly. I think that one of the things that not just our campaign, but let's call it the campaign in general for the ordinance did not do a good job of was talking about trans people, and it was something that wasn't openly addressed. It wasn't something that was out and discussed. But that was the part that lingered for a lot of the opposition. That was the part of the ordinance that had the most, I guess, controversy and the most sort of ambiguity as well. And so education around trans lives and that particular group of people and what that means in terms of a bathroom and what that means in terms of gender identity, I think had to be more out in the open, and the core strategy could have been wrong. Maybe we didn't just need to get out votes. We needed to educate people about why this was an important issue and why this was a civil rights issue and a human rights issue. And I just don't think that happened, in large part due to the timeline. There was essentially a 30-day window to campaign, and a lot of other factors that came into it. In addition to that, just that campaign also didn't do a good job talking about intersectionality and why this was a community issue, not just an LGBTQ issue. So intersectionality is the notion that you can be both Black and a woman, right? So your discrimination doesn't happen within these individual classes. You can be queer, Latina, handicapped, and a veteran. And so people didn't understand the number of ways in which this ordinance protected different classes of people across different classes. And so had the campaign been able to better, I guess, articulate that idea of why this was a community issue and not just an LGBTQ issue, I think we would have seen a little more success.
I'd like to just say one other thing about that. The bathroom issue had that's the wrong word, had powerful branding behind it and a lot of money behind it. So that was one big factor. And the other big factor is that it had religious organization behind it. So there were people who were already organized, like massive mega churches, being bussed in to vote and to voice against the ordinance. And Chris was fighting a very grassroots fight, and that reinforces further my call to action for this audience. When you see someone that's in this group trying to organize around something that really matters, please help get behind it, because sometimes we are David fighting Goliath.
And I would say, we as a group, I mean, we're not going to be all homogeneous, right? We're not going to all have the same thoughts and feelings. But the truth is that sometimes we as a group don't know what's going on with you in the community. So you have to tell us, you have to let us know. You have to reach out to us. So, I mean, I can put myself out there as a resource in that regard, but I didn't really know you were fighting that fight. I knew a fight was being fought, and I don't live in Houston, so that was the other part of it. But just what is it that you are doing? And I may or may not agree with what you're doing, whatever it is. But I definitely want to know so that I can figure out what's going on that front, because we as a group have a lot to offer in Houston, and especially if it's something that's right in the heart of community. I'm totally on board for anything like that. So,
well, the issue is not going to go away. It's going to probably be taken up by the Texas legislature. So your work's not done. It's good work.
And failure. So is there another question? Failure is also part of the deal, right? So that's just part of the deal when you're doing cause-related stuff. Yeah. So she talked about opposition funding, and if you're somebody who really is wanting to do something like this, cause-related stuff, how do you get that funding? That is a great question. I hope you guys can.
I can talk to that a little bit.
Yeah.
Sorry.
We're like in each other's space over here.
We're a nonprofit, so we seek out funding for particular projects and for overall capacity. For our projects, we partner with people. We have MOUs, memorandums of understanding, that allow us to seek money that says, hey, we're working with the city of Houston, or hey, we're working with Rice University on this. And people might not know who the heck we are, but when we start trotting around a few labels that are important, they start to take us seriously, and then they look at the merits of what we're trying to achieve and how we're achieving it. And I'd like to think that we're pretty strategic about that so it can hold its own weight. All that being said, we haven't raised a ton of money. We haven't needed to raise a ton of money, and I think that if you can show strength and growth without feeding it with lots of money, you can do a whole lot. I think that Better Make Room is a great example of something that is using more organic forms. I mean, obviously there's money behind that, but there's much more organic strength behind that community that helps it be successful. Sorry to put you on the spot.
There's not a lot of money behind Better Make Room. You would be surprised what happens out of the White House with no dollars. So sometimes influence is a lot more valuable than money. But going back to that favorite word of ours, conviction, there are a lot of ways to raise money. Crowdfunding has huge potential, especially if you are doing something that you can rally people behind with a lot of conviction. So it's kind of a cop-out answer, but you've got to be creative and keep in mind that money doesn't always win.
It helps.
Yeah, I would. So from the, I don't have any experience with this whatsoever, but what I've observed is that PACs have a lot of money. Go find the PAC that's. I don't think Houston doesn't have a progressive PAC that I'm aware of. I don't think. But for us, it was completely self-funded. We estimate that between, and I want to take a moment just to acknowledge the partners in this. So Kara Sykes, who's here, is one of the people who helped sort of create this idea of the campaign in general. Really creative directed the entire thing in conjunction with the photographer Lauren don't tell her. God, Lauren Merrick. If you want to, yeah. Lauren Merrick, amazing photographer. You can find her at Lauren Merrick on all of the socials. Completely self-funded, and I think we spent honestly $200 and about 300 and 400 hours. Facebook was our primary vehicle, and it definitely got the most traction. I reached about.
reached about 30,000 people. Yeah, so I mean, money is obviously huge, and you can get it from all kinds of places. You have to look for partners and people that are going to partner with you. I thought it was interesting because right now Gawker is kind of under attack from a lot of people, and they found, I mean, around that Hulk Hogan thing. Well, what was revealed like last week or whatever is that some very important people in Silicon Valley who had been like harmed by Gawker were funding Hulk Hogan's legal fund. So I'm just saying, you know, there's people out there that have strong feelings about certain things. And I guess I can say this out loud, but like Civilization just received a very big check from Craig Newmark at Craigslist. And so those kinds of people will watch what you're doing. And we asked him for money years ago and he said, eh. And then, you know, just recently he wrote us a really nice check. So I think it's a matter of like, I think what Jeff said is just showing your value over time, that you are totally committed to something and that you're going to be doing whatever it takes to get that thing done. So anyway.
I think that's Cammie's way of saying it. That's good.
Which is my way.
I like that.
So I just rephrased you. That's all I did. I think we are kind of almost, we're probably out of time. I don't have my clock on me, but maybe one more question and we'll have to kind of wrap up for the day. Yeah, in the back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'm going to try to rephrase your question for the online audience, but I think he said, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, that in this season that we're in now, the cult of personality in politics can be really overwhelming. And what he appreciated was that the idea that we can bring out causes and kind of focus on our causes during this season instead of personalities. And kind of how do you do that, though? I mean, what would be your goal? Is that right? All right.
Well, my trick is that I recognize that everything that I know about Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, John Kasich, Ted Cruz is manufactured, and that I don't know these people, and that there are people who are using data and demographics to manipulate me into feeling certain ways, and then they use the echo chamber of my friends to reinforce that. So I just that
was amazing.
Yeah, I just kind of write it all off.
Yeah. That was amazing. Wow.
But it's true. I mean, like I know a lot of political campaign managers, and they're some of the most cynical people in the world, but they'll tell you what's real. And the fact is that what's real is how they voted. What's real is what they say and what they say they're going to do. And if they say something that you believe in, you should vote for them. If they say something and you're like, that's a little crazy, but everybody's a little crazy, I'm still going to vote for that. Like, that's not okay. So that's just my trick.
I don't know how to follow that. I think that for me, it's about just kind of setting mental boundaries and knowing that you can't control what's going to happen every 4 years. It's particularly crazy this time around. And so what I choose to do is just kind of hide the things I don't want to keep seeing over and over, and kind of tune out some of the other things. But I think the opportunity for all of us, I love that we reminded you that thinking about causes is a good way to channel your energy. That's what we're doing. We're ignoring the things that everybody's entitled to their opinion about, and channeling our energy in positive ways. And I think one closing thing that's semi-related that I'd like to share is just that the word politics and the idea of politics can be a little intimidating. And there was a time in my life where I didn't think I was a politically charged person, and politics intimidated me a little bit. And then I figured out that politics is just a label, and that really all of these issues boil down to people and community and humanity. And I think one last thing I'd like to leave this audience with is just that if you are intimidated by politics, educate yourself, like Jeff so eloquently said, but don't be afraid to block out the idea that it's labeled with a political label, and just focus in on the issue and realize that if you align yourself with your people, with your tribe, you can really create political change. And try not to be intimidated by the idea of being political.
So I think I'll just add one comment initially to your question, which is that in fact there are elections taking place every year, sometimes multiple times per year, and usually those are the elections that can have the greatest impact on our day-to-day lives. So while a 4-year presidency term captures the attention, the cult of personality, I try to personally focus on just a handful of issues, recognizing that I can't do everything I want to do, and really focus on channeling my energy towards very specific things and in that I think we begin to that consistency of message, that consistency of thought helps establish more conversation, more discourse around that particular issue. People go to you for information about those issues, and that to me is the most rewarding part, is whenever I feel like I'm able to educate something on something that matters to me. I've just blanked on the rest of the comment. Yeah. So yeah.
That's good. And kind of wrapping this up, and what I've heard from out of each of their mouths, each person just said the word issues and issues. And here's what I'm going to say: we need to focus on issues and not people, and not personalities. Because when you focus on personalities, you're likely to say something that you're going to regret. But when you focus on the issues, you can stand in your two shoes and say, this is how I feel about this issue. And you're talking about something that will make a difference and really matter. So I would say, from that perspective, I love what you guys said just now, because I feel like that is what brings civility to the conversation. Moving away from attacking the person, like, oh, he's such a he says horrible things, or, oh, that socialist Bernie, or, oh my gosh, that Hillary, she's just fake. I mean, that is really not going to help the conversation. The conversation really has to be about the issues. Like, what is it that you care about? And I love that you say educate yourself, because then you can stand again in your own two shoes and say, I really understand why I believe in this issue and why I actually can stand behind it. And something you say won't waver me. You know what I'm saying? I won't waver, because I'm like, oh, is that right? Didn't know that. So, and we can have conversations then. But that being said, thank you guys. Let's give them a hand for coming and doing a very hard topic, putting themselves out there to talk about probably one of the toughest things right now. And I will say, we are going to be talking about video next month. We're going to be talking about how to get some great video. We have some really great videographers coming in that have run the Houston campaign for Houston. And so I really am excited about next month. Does anybody want to talk about jobs? Do we have jobs that we need to talk about here? Jobs. Oh, Amy has a job.
The Holocaust Museum of Houston is looking for a social media and digital specialist. It is part-time to start at 30 hours a week, but intended to become full-time. So if you guys know anyone, we've been looking really hard and not having much luck. You'd get to collaborate with the Black Sheep Agency, because we are running the Butterfly Project campaign for them, And it's just an incredible, worthwhile cause that you could feel great about every day.
And make sure you put that on the page, because we do have a little logo on the page with some jobs under it. And there are several jobs right now that are kind of big deals. So like some directors of social media communication. There's one at the Chronicle. They're actually looking for a journalist type of person to run the social media for the Chronicle. So just take a look at the page and make sure you add that one to the page. And thank you guys so much. Enjoy the rest of the summer till we see you in July. And I'm very excited to have you here today. Thanks.